My name is Linda, and I'm 32 years old. Last Saturday night, I stood in the middle of my father's retirement party at the most exclusive country club in town, surrounded by 200 of the city's most influential people. Everyone was dressed to the nines in designer gowns and expensive suits, while I wore a simple black dress that suddenly felt like a spotlight. My father had just finished thanking everyone for their support over his 40-year career, and then his eyes landed on me. The words that came out of his mouth next would change everything between us forever. As I stood there holding my champagne glass, I knew there was no going back from what I was about to do. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you've ever felt like the black sheep, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that'll make you think twice about family loyalty. To understand what happened that night, you need to know about my family. The Andersons have been a prominent name in our city for 3 generations. My grandfather built the foundation with a small construction company that grew into a real estate empire. My father Robert turned 65 this year and spent his entire career as CEO of Anderson Development, one of the largest construction firms in the state. My mother Margaret is 62 and has dedicated her life to being the perfect society wife. She chairs 3 different charity organizations and throws dinner parties that get written up in the society pages. Then there's my older brother Michael, who's 35, and everything my parents ever dreamed of. He graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law, worked at the most prestigious firm downtown for 10 years, and recently became a partner. Michael has always been the golden child, the one who would seamlessly take over the family business when Dad stepped down. He married his college sweetheart Patricia 2 years ago, and they live in a mansion just 10 minutes from our childhood home. And then there's me. From the time I could hold a crayon, I was drawing. While Michael played with toy trucks and talked about building skyscrapers, I spent hours sketching flowers in our garden or designing imaginary houses that looked nothing like the practical, profitable buildings our family constructed. When other kids my age were learning to play sports or piano, I begged for art classes. My parents reluctantly agreed, thinking it was just a phase I'd grow out of. But I never grew out of it. In high school, while Michael was student body president and captain of the debate team, I was the quiet girl in the corner of the art room working on paintings until the janitor had to kick me out. My guidance counselor suggested I apply to art schools, but my parents made it clear that wasn't an option. They expected me to study business or law, something practical that would benefit the family company. The fight started when I was 17. I wanted to major in graphic design at the state university, and they wanted me to study business administration. After months of arguments, we reached a compromise. I could minor in art as long as I majored in marketing. They figured marketing was close enough to the creative field to keep me happy while still being useful for the business. College was the first time I felt like I could breathe. My marketing classes were tolerable, but my art and design courses were where I came alive. I spent every free moment in the computer lab learning Photoshop and Illustrator, creating designs that my professors said showed real promise. During my junior year, I started taking freelance graphic design jobs to pay for my art supplies. What started as pocket money quickly became something more significant. After graduation, my parents expected me to come work for Anderson Development immediately. Instead, I told them I wanted to pursue graphic design professionally. The disappointment in their eyes was devastating, but I couldn't force myself to sit in a corporate office selling buildings I had no passion for. They gave me 1 year to get it out of my system before joining the family business. That 1 year turned into 11. I built a successful freelance graphic design business, working with small businesses, nonprofits, and startups. I wasn't making Anderson Development money, but I was paying my bills and doing work that filled me with purpose. My parents tolerated it, always introducing me as their daughter, who does some art on the side, at social events. They kept hoping I'd eventually come to my senses and join the family firm. The tension in our family was always there, simmering just beneath the surface. Sunday dinners at my parents' house became exercises in diplomatic conversation. Michael would talk about his latest cases and business acquisitions, while I sat quietly knowing that any mention of my work would be met with polite but dismissive smiles. I felt like a stranger in my own family, someone who didn't quite fit the mold they'd created for the Anderson legacy. 3 months before Dad's retirement party, everything came to a head. He called a family meeting at the house, something he only did for major announcements. Michael and I sat in Dad's study surrounded by awards and photos documenting his successful career, while Mom served coffee in her finest china. Dad cleared his throat and announced that he was officially retiring at the end of the year. The transition plan was simple. Michael would take over as CEO of Anderson Development, and the board had already approved the succession. But then Dad turned to me with what he called an exciting opportunity. He wanted me to come aboard as Director of Marketing and Communications, overseeing all the company's advertising, branding, and public relations. The salary he offered was more than double what I made freelancing, plus benefit stock options and a clear path to eventually running that entire division. It was by any objective measure an incredible offer. I should have been grateful. I should have jumped at the chance to finally be included in the family business in a way that utilized my skills. But sitting in that leather chair looking at the expectant faces of my family, all I could think about was the creative freedom I'd lose. Anderson Development's marketing was conservative, traditional, focused on appealing to established wealth and institutional clients. There would be no room for the innovative, colorful designs that made my heart race. I told them I needed time to think about it. Dad's face darkened immediately. Time to think about what, Linda? This is exactly what you've been working toward. It's marketing, it's creative, and it's a chance to finally contribute to what this family has built. I tried to explain that my freelance work was fulfilling, that I had clients who depended on me, that I wasn't sure corporate life was right for me. Michael jumped in, trying to play peacemaker, suggesting we could structure the role to allow some outside projects. But Dad cut him off. "You've had 11 years to play artist," he said, his voice getting louder. "It's time to grow up and take some responsibility. This family has given you everything, and you've contributed nothing in return. This is your chance to change that." The word "nothing" hit me like a physical blow. I thought about the award-winning campaign I'd created for the Children's Hospital fundraiser, the brand identity I'd developed for 3 different nonprofits that had helped them increase donations by over 40%, the small businesses I'd helped establish their presence in competitive markets. But in Dad's eyes, none of that mattered, because it didn't directly benefit Anderson Development. I stood up and told them I couldn't accept the position. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's coffee cup rattled against its saucer as she set it down. Michael stared at his hands. Dad's face went through several shades of red before he finally spoke. "You're making a mistake, Linda. A selfish, short-sighted mistake. But don't think you can come crawling back when your little art hobby stops paying the bills." I left that meeting feeling more isolated from my family than ever before. Over the following weeks, the house felt different when I visited. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. My parents were civil but cold, treating me like a guest rather than their daughter. Michael tried to bridge the gap, calling me regularly to see if I'd reconsidered, but even his attempts at reconciliation felt like pressure to conform. The retirement party planning became a symbol of my outsider status. Mom involved Michael in every decision, from choosing the venue to selecting the menu. When I offered to design the invitations, she politely declined, saying they'd already hired a professional firm. I wasn't asked to give a speech, wasn't included in the planning committee, and wasn't even consulted about the guest list. 2 weeks before the party, I received my formal invitation in the mail. It was addressed to Ms. Linda Anderson in the same impersonal font used for all the other guests. There was no personal note from Mom, no family dinner invitation, just the standard invitation with RSVP instructions. I almost didn't go. I spent several nights staring at that invitation, wondering if my presence would make the evening better or worse for everyone involved. But something inside me refused to let them write me off completely. Despite everything, this was still my father's retirement, a milestone in his life that I'd been part of by proximity if not by choice. I decided to attend hoping that maybe the celebratory atmosphere would soften everyone's hearts and we could begin to repair the damage. The morning of the retirement party, I stood in front of my closet for over an hour, trying to decide what to wear. Every dress felt like a statement I wasn't sure I wanted to make. Too formal, and I'd look like I was trying too hard to fit in. Too casual, and I'd be disrespecting the occasion. I finally settled on a simple black dress with clean lines, elegant but not flashy, appropriate but not attention-seeking. The Greenwood Country Club sat on 200 acres of perfectly manicured landscape with a golf course that hosted PGA tournaments and a clubhouse that looked like a European mansion. Valets in white jackets took keys from guests arriving in Mercedes, BMWs, and Teslas. I drove my modest Honda Civic, suddenly feeling underdressed despite my careful outfit selection. Inside the main ballroom had been transformed into something from a magazine spread. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in crisp white linens and adorned with elaborate floral centerpieces. A jazz quartet played softly in one corner, while servers in black uniforms circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres on silver trays. I recognized most of the guests from years of family social events. There was Judge Morrison, who'd officiated Michael's wedding, the Hartwell family who owned half the downtown real estate, city council members, bank presidents, and other construction company executives. These were the people who'd built our city's power structure, and they all seemed to know exactly where they belonged in this room. My parents stood near the entrance, greeting guests with practiced smiles. Dad wore his best tuxedo, the one he saved for the most important occasions, while Mom looked stunning in a navy blue gown that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They were in their element, graciously accepting congratulations and well wishes from the city's elite. When I approached them, their smiles became more strained. Mom kissed my cheek and complimented my dress, but her eyes didn't quite meet mine. Dad shook my hand like I was a business acquaintance rather than his daughter. The awkwardness was palpable, and I quickly excused myself to find my assigned table. I wasn't surprised to discover I'd been seated at table 12, far from the head table where my parents and Michael would sit. My table mates were pleasant enough, mostly business associates of Dad's that I'd met at previous functions, but the conversation felt forced. They asked polite questions about my work, but I could tell they were just being courteous. When I mentioned graphic design, their eyes glazed over with the same polite disinterest I'd seen countless times before. My Aunt Susan, Dad's younger sister, found me during the cocktail hour. She'd always been the more progressive member of the Anderson family, having scandalized everyone by becoming a social worker instead of marrying a successful businessman. "You look beautiful, honey," she said, giving me a genuine hug. "How are you holding up?" I appreciated her concern, but I wasn't ready to admit how isolated I felt. We chatted about her work at the domestic violence shelter and my latest design projects. She was one of the few family members who seemed genuinely interested in my career, asking thoughtful questions about my clients and creative process. "You know," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening, "your dad is proud of you even if he doesn't know how to show it. This whole retirement thing has him emotional. He's scared about letting go of control, and he's taking it out on everyone around him." I wanted to believe her, but Dad's recent behavior suggested otherwise. Still, I appreciated Susan's attempt to build bridges, even if I wasn't convinced they were structurally sound. As dinner was served, I watched my family from across the room. Michael gave a heartfelt speech about Dad's mentorship and the legacy he was leaving behind. Several business partners shared stories about Dad's integrity and vision. The mayor presented him with a key to the city, recognizing his contributions to the community's growth and development. Throughout it all, Dad beamed with pride and satisfaction. This was his night, the culmination of decades of hard work and success. I found myself genuinely happy for him, despite our recent conflicts. Whatever our personal disagreements, he had built something impressive and lasting. Then it was Dad's turn to speak. He walked to the podium with the confidence of a man who'd spent 40 years commanding boardrooms and construction sites. His voice was strong and clear as he thanked his colleagues, his business partners, and the community leaders who'd supported him throughout his career. He talked about the buildings that would stand as monuments to his work, the jobs he'd created, and the projects that had helped shape our city's skyline. He thanked Mom for her unwavering support and the elegant way she'd represented the Anderson name in social circles. He spoke glowingly about Michael calling him the future of Anderson development and expressing complete confidence in his ability to lead the company forward. The room was silent, hanging on every word of this powerful man's reflection on his life's work. I felt a mix of emotions, pride in his accomplishments, tempered by the growing realization that I might not be mentioned at all in this summary of his legacy. Then his eyes found me across the room. The pause lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I could see him weighing his words, deciding how or if to acknowledge my presence. The entire room seemed to sense the tension, conversation stopping as people followed his gaze to my table. What happened next would replay in my mind for months afterward. Dad's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "You know I've been blessed with a wonderful family. My son Michael has made me prouder than any father has a right to be." He paused, his eyes still locked on mine. "But tonight, I also want to acknowledge my daughter Linda." For just a moment, I felt a surge of hope. Maybe Susan was right. Maybe he was going to surprise everyone, including me, with words of acceptance and love. "You're the biggest disgrace to this family." The words hit the room like a physical force. Conversations didn't just stop, they evaporated. The gentle clinking of silverware against china ceased completely. Even the jazz quartet seemed to miss a note. 200 of the city's most influential people turned in their chairs to stare at me, some with shock, others with the morbid curiosity of witnesses to a car accident. I felt the blood drain from my face as every eye in the room focused on me. At the head table, Michael had gone pale, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. Mom's hand was pressed to her chest, her face a mask of horror at the public humiliation her husband had just unleashed. But Dad wasn't finished. 11 years, he continued, his voice gaining strength from the crowd's attention. 11 years, I've waited for you to grow up and contribute something meaningful to this family. Instead, you waste your time with finger paints and computer games, while your brother builds a real career. The silence in the room was suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as I sat frozen in my chair. This wasn't just a private family disagreement anymore. Dad had chosen to humiliate me in front of everyone who mattered in our social circle, ensuring that this moment would be whispered about in country club dining rooms for months to come. Part of me wanted to sink into the floor and disappear. The shame was overwhelming, a burning sensation that started in my chest and spread outward until my entire body felt like it was on fire. But as I looked around at the faces staring at me, some pitying, some judgmental, some just curious about how this family drama would unfold, something else started building inside me. Anger. Pure, clean anger that cut through the shame and embarrassment like a sword through fog. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady, but my resolve crystallizing with each second. The champagne glass in my hand felt solid and real, an anchor in the surreal nightmare this evening had become. Every eye in the room followed my movement as I rose to my full height, my black dress suddenly feeling like armor rather than a costume. "Perfect," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. "Then erase me from your will, too." The effect was immediate and devastating. Dad's face went from triumphant to shocked in the span of a heartbeat. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the podium with a sound like a gunshot in the silence. Pieces of crystal scattered in all directions, and the golden liquid spread across the white marble like spilled sunshine. But I wasn't done. 11 years of polite silence, of swallowed pride, of pretending that my work didn't matter, came pouring out in a flood of words I'd never allowed myself to speak. "You want to know what I've contributed to this family? I've contributed my silence while you've spent 11 years telling everyone who'll listen that I'm a failure. I've contributed my presence at every family dinner where you've made it clear that my work is worthless. I've contributed my patience while you've treated my career like a hobby that I should have outgrown by now. The room was so quiet, I could hear people breathing. Someone's phone was buzzing on a table somewhere, but no one moved to answer it. All attention was focused on this unexpected showdown between father and daughter. I've built a business from nothing. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. I've won awards for my work. I've helped nonprofits raise hundreds of thousands of dollars with campaigns I created. I've given small businesses the professional image they needed to compete with corporations. But none of that matters to you because it doesn't say Anderson Development on the letterhead. Michael started to stand, probably hoping to intervene and salvage what was left of the evening, but I held up my hand to stop him. This was my moment, and I was going to take it. You know what the real disgrace is? It's not that I chose art over construction. It's that you've spent my entire adult life trying to make me feel ashamed of work that brings me joy and helps other people. It's that you'd rather have a miserable daughter working in your company than a happy daughter succeeding on her own terms. Dad found his voice, but it came out as a croak. Linda, you're making a scene. I'm making a scene. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You just called your own daughter a disgrace in front of 200 people, and you're worried about me making a scene. The crowd was completely captivated now. This wasn't just family drama. This was theater, raw and unscripted and impossible to look away from. I could see people taking out their phones, probably recording videos that would be shared in group chats before the evening was over. Here's what's going to happen, I said, raising my champagne glass like I was making a toast. I'm going to walk out of here, and I'm going to build the most successful design firm this city has ever seen. And when I do, when my name is in the newspaper for all the right reasons, remember that you had the chance to be proud of me instead of ashamed of me. I drained my champagne glass in one gulp and set it down on the table with a sharp click that seemed to echo in the silence. Congratulations on your retirement, Dad. I hope it brings you everything you deserve. With that, I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking against the marble floor in a steady rhythm that sounded like a countdown. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, creating a clear path to the door. No one spoke. No one moved to stop me. Even the servers had frozen in place, silver trays balanced in their hands as they watched this family implode in real time. Just before I reached the door, I turned back one last time. Dad was still standing at the podium, looking smaller somehow than he had just minutes before. Mom had her face in her hands. Michael was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Oh, and one more thing, I called back across the silent ballroom. Send my regards to whatever marketing firm you hire to replace me. Then I walked out into the night, leaving behind 40 years of family expectations and stepping into something entirely unknown. I don't remember driving home. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in my apartment kitchen at 2 a.m, still wearing my black dress, staring at my phone as it lit up with call after call. Michael's name appeared on the screen over and over, interspersed with calls from various aunts, uncles, and family friends who'd witnessed the meltdown. I let them all go to voicemail. The adrenaline that had carried me through my confrontation with Dad was wearing off, replaced by a hollow feeling in my chest. What had I done? In the span of 5 minutes, I'd essentially severed ties with my entire family in the most public way possible. By tomorrow morning, everyone in our social circle would know about the Anderson family scandal. My laptop was open on the kitchen counter, showing my email inbox filled with notifications. Word traveled fast in our connected world, and several of my current clients had already reached out after seeing videos of the incident on social media. The footage was grainy and the audio wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough to capture the general outline of what had happened. Michael kept calling until I finally answered at 3 a.m. Linda, thank God. Where are you? Are you okay? His voice was strained, exhausted. I could hear Patricia in the background asking if I was safe. I'm fine, Michael. I'm at home. We need to talk. This whole thing got out of hand, but we can fix it. Dad was just... Just what? I interrupted. Just having a bad night, just emotional about retirement, just accidentally called me a disgrace in front of 200 people. Michael sighed heavily. He was wrong, Linda. What he said was completely out of line. But you have to understand he's been under a lot of stress with the transition, and he's worried about the company's future and… Stop, I cut him off again. Just stop making excuses for him. You've been doing it our entire lives, and I'm tired of it. Dad said exactly what he meant to say. He thinks I'm a disgrace, and honestly, Michael, maybe he's right. Don't say that. You're not a disgrace. You're talented and successful and… Successful. I laughed bitterly. According to who, I'm 32 years old. I rent a one-bedroom apartment and I drive a 12-year-old Honda. In Dad's world, in our family's world, that's not success. That's failure with a college degree. We talked for another hour with Michael, trying to convince me to come to Sunday dinner so we could all talk things through. But I knew there was no going back from what had happened. Dad had drawn a line in the sand, and I'd not only crossed it, I'd erased it completely. Over the next few days, my phone rang constantly. Reporters from the local newspaper wanted to interview me about the Anderson family incident. Friends from high school reached out after seeing the videos on Facebook. Even strangers were commenting on articles about the story, debating whether I was brave or disrespectful. But it was the business calls that surprised me the most. 3 different companies reached out within the first week, asking if I was available for consulting work. Apparently, my public stand against family pressure had resonated with other entrepreneurs who valued independence over conformity. The most interesting call came from David Chen, the CEO of Tech Forward, a rapidly growing software company that had been trying to break into the local market. He'd seen the coverage of Dad's retirement party and was impressed by what he called my authentic passion for creative work. "I've been looking for a design partner who understands what it means to build something from scratch," he said during our phone conversation. "Someone who's not afraid to take risks and who won't try to make us look like every other tech company in the market." We met for coffee that Friday, and I knew within 10 minutes that this was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. David was young, ambitious, and completely unimpressed by old money connections or family names. He cared about results, innovation, and creating products that actually helped people. "I want to offer you a 6-month contract to overhaul our entire brand identity," he said. "Logo, website, marketing materials, everything. It's a big project, bigger than anything you've probably handled before, but I think you're ready for it." The contract he offered was worth more than I typically made in an entire year. It was also the kind of creative challenge I dreamed about, working with a company that wanted to stand out rather than blend in. I signed the contract that afternoon. For the first time since Dad's retirement party, I felt like I could breathe properly. This wasn't just a new client. It was validation that my work had value beyond my family's opinion of it. Someone was willing to bet significant money on my ability to deliver results. That weekend, I started sketching ideas for Tech Forward's new brand identity. The creative energy that had been suppressed for months came flooding back, and I found myself working until 2 in the morning, not because I had to, but because I was genuinely excited about what I was creating. Mom called that Sunday, her voice careful and formal. "Linda, I think we should talk." We met at a quiet cafe downtown Neutral Territory, where neither of us had the home field advantage. Mom looked tired, older somehow than she had just a week before. The scandal had taken its toll on the entire family. "Your father is sorry," she said without preamble. "He knows he handled things badly." "Is he sorry, or are you sorry for him?" I asked. Mom's composure cracked slightly. "He's too proud to apologize directly, but he's been miserable since the party. He didn't mean for things to go that far." I studied my mother's face, looking for signs of genuine remorse rather than damage control. "Mom, did you agree with what he said?" She was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee with mechanical precision. "I think your father has very definite ideas about what success looks like, and those ideas don't leave much room for other definitions." It wasn't quite an apology, but It was the closest thing to criticism of Dad I'd ever heard from her. "I got a new client this week," I told her. "A big contract that's going to change everything for my business." She looked up surprised. "That's wonderful, honey. What kind of company?" For the first time in years, I told my mother about my work without feeling defensive or apologetic. I explained the tech-forward project, the creative challenges it presented, and my vision for their new brand identity. She listened without the glazed expression I was used to seeing when I discussed my career. "You sound happy," she said when I finished. "I am happy. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." We parted with a tentative hug and a promise to stay in touch. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a beginning. 6 months later, I was standing in the empty office space that would become Creative Haven, my own design studio. The Tech Forward project had been an overwhelming success, leading to 3 more major contracts and enough revenue to make the leap from freelancing to running an actual business. The space was raw and industrial, with exposed brick walls and large windows that let in streams of natural light. It was nothing like the polished corporate offices where Dad had built his empire, and that was exactly the point. This was going to be a place where creativity thrived, where young designers could take risks and push boundaries without worrying about conservative corporate expectations. Sarah Martinez was my first hire, a recent art school graduate with incredible talent and infectious enthusiasm. She reminded me of myself at that age, full of ideas and hungry for opportunities to prove herself. Watching her face light up when I offered her the job was like seeing my younger self get the chance I'd always wanted. "I can't believe this is real," she said, looking around the empty space. 6 months ago, I was serving coffee and wondering if I'd ever use my degree. Now I'm going to be working on actual campaigns for actual companies. We spent the afternoon planning the office layout, discussing equipment needs, and brainstorming the kind of company culture we wanted to create. It was the opposite of every corporate environment I'd ever experienced, built on collaboration, rather than hierarchy, innovation, rather than tradition. The business grew faster than I'd expected. Within 3 months of opening Creative Haven, we had 5 employees and a waiting list of potential clients. The work was diverse and challenging, from nonprofit fundraising campaigns to tech startup brand development to restaurant identity packages. But the project I was most proud of was our pro bono work with the women's shelter where Aunt Susan volunteered. Their outdated materials had been limiting their fundraising efforts, so we created a complete rebrand that helped them increase donations by 60% in their first quarter. The recognition started small, with features in local business magazines and design blogs. But when Creative Haven won the Regional Small Business Innovation Award, the story made the front page of the business section. The article included quotes from our clients about the impact our work had made on their success. Dad saw the article. I knew because Michael told me during one of our monthly coffee meetings, which had become our way of maintaining a relationship despite the ongoing family tension. "He didn't say much," Michael admitted, stirring sugar into his latte. "But he read it twice, and he left it on his desk for a week before putting it away." I wasn't sure how to feel about that. Part of me wanted Dad's approval even after everything that had happened. But a larger part of me had moved beyond needing his validation to feel successful. "How's the transition going for him?" I asked. Michael grimaced. "Not great, honestly. He's having a hard time letting go. He calls me 3 times a day with suggestions and comes to the office even though he's supposed to be retired. Mom's ready to send him on a cruise just to get him out of everyone's hair." I almost felt sorry for Dad. He'd spent 40 years being the center of his own universe, and suddenly that universe was continuing to function without him. It was probably the first time in his adult life that he wasn't essential to something's success. The conversation shifted to Michael's own struggles with leadership. Despite his legal expertise and business acumen, he was discovering that managing people was entirely different from managing cases. Some of Dad's old-school employees were resistant to his more collaborative management style, while younger hires found the company culture too rigid and traditional. I keep thinking about what you said at the retirement party, he told me, about building something that brings you joy. I'm good at this job, Linda, but I'm not sure it brings me joy. It was the first time Michael had ever admitted that the family business might not be his true calling. We talked about his interests outside of work, his secret love of photography, and his regret about never traveling before settling into his predetermined career path. You know it's not too late to make changes, I said carefully. The company doesn't have to define your entire life. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Easy for you to say. You already made your escape. That word, escape, stuck with me for days afterward. I'd never thought of leaving the family business as an escape, but maybe that's exactly what it was. I'd escaped the suffocating expectations, the constant criticism, and the requirement to fit into a mold that was never designed for someone like me. My personal life was changing too. I'd started dating James, a freelance photographer who specialized in architectural photography. He understood the creative life in a way that my previous boyfriends, mostly other young professionals from my parents' social circle, never had. He didn't care about family connections or social status. He cared about the quality of light in a room and the story that buildings told about the people who used them. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally, built on shared interests and mutual respect rather than social compatibility. He loved hearing about my design projects and often offered to collaborate on presentations or client pitches. For the first time in my life, I was with someone who saw my work as valuable and interesting rather than a cute hobby. The Creative Haven team was becoming like a second family bound together by our shared commitment to doing meaningful work. We instituted Innovation Fridays, where anyone could propose experimental projects or new approaches to client challenges. The energy in the office was electric, with people staying late, not because they had to, but because they were genuinely excited about what they were creating. One evening, as I was locking up the office after a particularly productive day, I realized that I couldn't remember the last time I'd thought about Dad's opinion of my work. The sting of his words at the retirement party had faded, replaced by the daily satisfaction of building something I believed in. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Just saw the article about our campaign for the Children's Hospital. My mom is so proud she's showing it to everyone at her book club. Thanks for giving me the chance to work on something that matters. That message was worth more to me than any family approval could ever be. The call came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year after Dad's retirement party. I was in the middle of a client presentation when my phone started buzzing insistently. Michael's name kept appearing on the screen, which was unusual since he knew I was in meetings all morning. When I finally called him back during lunch, his voice was strained. "Linda, we need to talk. Can you meet me after work?" He wouldn't tell me what was wrong over the phone, so I spent the rest of the day worrying about various catastrophes. Had something happened to Mom? Was Dad sick? Had the family business collapsed under Michael's leadership? We met at the same cafe where Mom and I had reconciled months earlier. Michael looked exhausted, his usually perfect appearance rumpled and stressed. He ordered a double espresso and drank half of it before saying a word. "Dad wants to see you," he finally said. I nearly choked on my coffee. "What?" "He's been following your career, Linda. He knows about the awards the magazine features, the clients you've been landing. He saw the piece in Business Week about Creative Haven being one of the fastest-growing design firms in the region." I hadn't known Dad was paying attention to my success. The idea that he'd been tracking my career from a distance was both surprising and unsettling. "What does he want?" I asked. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "He wants to apologize. And he wants to discuss a potential partnership between Anderson Development and Creative Haven." The irony was almost laughable. A year ago, Dad had publicly humiliated me for refusing to join his company. Now, apparently, he wanted to hire my company as an outside contractor. "I'm not interested in his apology," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "And I'm definitely not interested in a partnership. Just hear him out. Michael pleaded. He's changed, Linda. The retirement has been harder on him than anyone expected. He's had time to think about things, about family, about what really matters. I studied my brother's face, looking for signs that this was another attempt to manipulate me back into the family fold. But Michael looked genuinely hopeful, like he believed this might be a chance for real healing. Did Mom put him up to this? I asked. Actually, no. This was all his idea. He's been working up the courage to call you for months. Despite everything that had happened, I found myself curious about what Dad wanted to say. Not because I needed his approval anymore, but because I wanted to understand how he'd processed the events of the past year. Fine, I said, but we meet on neutral ground, and this is a business discussion only. I'm not interested in family therapy. We arranged to meet at Dad's country club the following Saturday morning. I chose the club because it was where everything had started, and there was something symbolically appropriate about returning to the scene of our original confrontation. Dad was waiting for me in the club's quiet library, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. Retirement hadn't been kind to him. He'd lost weight and developed a defeated posture that seemed completely foreign on a man who'd spent 40 years projecting absolute confidence. He stood when I entered the room, and for a moment we just looked at each other across a year's worth of silence and hurt feelings. "Thank you for coming," he said finally. I sat down across from him but didn't respond. This was his meeting. He could drive the conversation. "I owe you an apology." He began, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "What I said at the retirement party was cruel and unfair. You didn't deserve that, especially not in front of all those people." It was the apology I'd wanted a year ago, but hearing it now felt anticlimactic. I'd moved beyond needing his acknowledgement of wrongdoing. "I've been reading about your company," he continued. "The work you're doing is impressive, really impressive. I didn't understand it before, but I'm starting to see that there are different ways to measure success." I waited for the "but" that usually followed Dad's rare compliments. Instead, he pulled out a folder and placed it on the table between us. "Anderson Development is struggling," he said bluntly. "Michael is a good leader, but the company needs to evolve to stay competitive. Our marketing is outdated, our brand identity is stale, and we're losing younger clients to firms that understand how to communicate in the modern market." He opened the folder to reveal financial documents, market research, and competitive analysis. It was the kind of thorough preparation I'd expect from a businessman of his caliber. "I want to hire Creative Haven to completely rebrand Anderson Development," he said. "New logo, new website, new marketing strategy, everything. It would be the biggest contract in your company's history." The offer was substantial, potentially doubling Creative Haven's annual revenue in a single project. It was also professionally validating in a way I hadn't expected. Dad wasn't offering me charity or family favors. He was acknowledging that my company could solve problems his couldn't. "Why now?" I asked. "Why not hire one of the big agencies you've always preferred?" Dad was quiet for a moment, studying his hands. "Because I've spent the last year watching you build something remarkable from nothing. Because I've realized that my definition of success was too narrow. And because I want the chance to work with my daughter, even if it took me too long to recognize her talent." It was the closest thing to genuine respect I'd ever heard from him. But I wasn't ready to forgive and forget, just because he'd finally discovered my professional value. "This would be strictly business," I said. "Creative Haven would treat Anderson Development like any other client. No family discounts, no special treatment, and no interference in our creative process." "I wouldn't expect anything else," he replied. We spent the next hour discussing the scope of work timeline and expectations. It was the first real business conversation Dad and I had ever had, and I was surprised by how well we communicated when we focused on professional rather than personal matters. By the end of the meeting, we'd outlined the framework for a 6-month rebranding project that would showcase Creative Haven's capabilities while potentially revitalizing Anderson Development's market position. As I was gathering my things to leave, Dad spoke one more time. "Linda, I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've built. I should have said that a long time ago. I looked at him across the table, this man who'd shaped so much of my life through his expectations and disappointments. He looked genuinely remorseful. More than that, he looked like he finally understood something fundamental about who I was. "Thank you," I said. "That means something, even if it doesn't change everything." We shook hands like business partners, which in many ways is exactly what we were becoming. The Anderson Development Project became Creative Haven's signature success story. We completely reimagined their brand identity, creating a modern, sophisticated image that honored their construction heritage while appealing to contemporary clients. The new website increased their lead generation by 40% in the first quarter, and their updated marketing materials helped them win 3 major projects they'd been competing for. More importantly, the collaboration proved that Dad and I could work together professionally even if our personal relationship remained complicated. He respected Creative Haven's creative process and didn't interfere with our strategic decisions. When he had concerns or suggestions, he communicated them through proper business channels rather than family pressure. The project's success led to ongoing consulting work with Anderson Development and opened doors to other established companies looking to modernize their image. Creative Haven's reputation grew from promising local firm to innovative regional leader, practically overnight. But the most significant change was in my relationship with Dad. We weren't close, and we probably never would be in the traditional father-daughter sense. But we'd found a way to respect each other as professionals, which was more than I'd thought possible a year earlier. Mom and I had lunch the week after the Anderson Development Project launched. She looked happier and more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. "Your father is different now," she said. "Retirement was hard on him, but working with you on this project reminded him that there are many ways to contribute to the world." She told me that Dad had started volunteering with a nonprofit that built affordable housing, using his construction expertise to help families who couldn't afford market-rate homes. It was the first time in his career that he'd worked on projects motivated by social impact rather than profit. "He talks about you differently now," she continued. "He tells people about Creative Haven's success with genuine pride. He's finally realized that building a business and building buildings require the same fundamental skills." I was glad Dad had found purpose in his retirement, and I was even gladder that our professional collaboration had helped him see my work in a new light. But I'd learned not to measure my self-worth by his approval, which made his newfound respect feel like a nice bonus rather than a desperate need fulfilled. Creative Haven continued to grow, expanding to a team of 12 designers, marketers, and project managers. We moved to a larger space in the Arts District, a converted warehouse with soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light. The new office became a destination for other creative professionals, hosting networking events and design workshops that strengthened our connections within the local business community. I started speaking at conferences about entrepreneurship and creative business development, sharing the story of how Creative Haven had grown from a one-person freelance operation to a regional leader in just 2 years. The narrative of family conflict and eventual professional recognition resonated with other entrepreneurs who'd chosen unconventional paths. But the most rewarding part of Creative Haven's success was watching our team members develop their own careers and creative voices. Sarah had been promoted to senior designer and was leading major client projects with the same passion and innovation she'd brought to her first day. 2 of our other designers had started their own freelance practices as side projects, using skills and confidence they'd developed while working at Creative Haven. James and I had moved in together, creating a life that balanced our individual creative pursuits with shared goals and experiences. He'd started photographing our completed projects, creating a portfolio that showcased both his technical skills and Creative Haven's design impact. Our professional collaboration had strengthened our personal relationship, proving that 2 creative people could support each other's work without competing or compromising their individual visions. One evening, as I was reviewing proofs for our latest client presentation, I realized that I'd built exactly the life I'd dreamed of during those lonely Sunday dinners at my parents' house. I was doing work that challenged and fulfilled me, leading a team of people who shared my values and contributing to my community in meaningful ways. The phone call that had started everything, Dad's public humiliation at his retirement party, had ultimately been the catalyst for the best year of my professional life. His attempt to shame me into conformity had backfired spectacularly, pushing me to prove my worth on my own terms rather than his. But more than professional success, I'd gained something even more valuable: the unshakable confidence that comes from knowing you can survive the worst your family can throw at you and still thrive. Dad's words had hurt, but they hadn't destroyed me. Instead, they'd freed me from the exhausting effort of trying to earn approval that was never really available. I was finally completely authentically myself. 2 years after that devastating retirement party, I stood in front of 500 business leaders accepting the Young Entrepreneur of the Year award from the Regional Chamber of Commerce. The ceremony was held at the same country club where Dad had called me a disgrace, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone who'd witnessed both events. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of defining success on your own terms and the courage required to pursue a path that others don't understand. I didn't mention the family drama that had catalyzed my journey, but many people in the audience knew the backstory and understood the subtext of my words. Dad was in the audience. He'd been invited as a distinguished business leader and longtime chamber member, but I suspected he'd also come specifically to support me. When our eyes met during my speech, he nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement and perhaps even approval. After the ceremony, during the reception, several people approached me with their own stories of family expectations and professional rebellion. A young lawyer told me about leaving his father's firm to start a practice focused on immigration law. A doctor shared her experience of switching from surgery to community health, despite her parents' disappointment. A tech entrepreneur described the years of family pressure to join the military instead of building software companies. These conversations reminded me that my experience wasn't unique. Families all over the world struggle with the tension between tradition and innovation, between honoring the past and embracing the future. The difference was that most of these conflicts happened behind closed doors, while mine had played out in front of 200 witnesses. Near the end of the evening, Dad approached me at the bar, where I was celebrating with the Creative Haven team. "Congratulations," he said simply. "You've earned this." We talked for a few minutes about the award, the business and industry trends. It was a normal conversation between two professionals who happened to share DNA without the undercurrent of tension that had characterized our previous interactions. As he was leaving, Dad turned back to me one more time. "You know, I was wrong about what I said that night. You're not a disgrace to this family. You're probably the best thing about it." It was the apology I'd needed to hear, delivered without fanfare or expectation of response. I watched him walk away, this man who'd shaped so much of my identity through his approval and disapproval, and realized that his opinion no longer had the power to define my self-worth. But it was nice to finally have his respect. The months that followed brought continued growth for Creative Haven and deeper healing in my family relationships. Mom and I established a new tradition of monthly art gallery visits, where we could connect over shared aesthetic interests rather than family obligations. Michael and I maintained our coffee meetings, but our conversations had evolved from damage control to genuine friendship. He'd started taking photography classes and had even done a few small commercial shoots for Anderson Development's project documentation. Watching him discover his own creative talents reminded me of my early days experimenting with design software, that sense of finding a language that felt natural and exciting. "I'm thinking about stepping back from day-to-day operations," he told me during one of our meetings. "Maybe transitioning to more of a chairman role while someone else handles the daily management." It was a radical idea for someone who'd been groomed for leadership since childhood, but Michael was discovering that effective leadership sometimes meant knowing when to delegate authority to people better suited for specific roles. The conversation reminded me of a difficult decision I'd been contemplating for Creative Haven. The business had grown to the point where I was spending more time on administration and less time on actual design work. We needed a dedicated general manager who could handle operations while I focused on creative direction and business development. It was the kind of delegation that successful business owners eventually had to master, but it required letting go of control in ways that felt uncomfortable. Like Dad learning to trust Michael with Anderson Development's leadership, I had to learn to trust other people with aspects of the business I'd built from nothing. The candidate we eventually hired was Patricia Chen, an MBA with experience managing creative agencies and a genuine appreciation for design excellence. She brought the operational expertise that Creative Haven needed while respecting the creative culture we'd worked hard to establish. Her first major initiative was implementing systems that allowed us to take on larger, more complex projects without sacrificing the personal attention that had become our signature. Within 6 months, we doubled our project capacity while maintaining the quality standards that had built our reputation. James proposed to me that fall in the Creative Haven office after hours, surrounded by the work that had brought us together and the space where we'd both discovered our professional voices. The ring was simple and elegant, designed by a local jewelry artist whose brand identity we'd created the year before. We planned a small wedding focused on celebrating our partnership rather than satisfying social expectations. The guest list included our families, the Creative Haven team, and the clients and collaborators who'd become genuine friends. It was exactly the kind of celebration we wanted: personal, meaningful, and authentic to who we were as individuals and as a couple. Dad offered to pay for the wedding, a gesture that surprised everyone, including him. I thanked him, but declined, explaining that James and I wanted to create an event that reflected our own values and aesthetic preferences. He understood, and I appreciated that he'd made the offer without any strings attached. The wedding took place in the sculpture garden behind the art museum, with Creative Haven's team handling all the design elements from invitations to signage. It was a showcase of our work and a celebration of the creative community we'd built together. During the reception, Aunt Susan gave a toast that perfectly captured the journey our family had traveled. 3 years ago, Linda stood up at her father's retirement party and declared her independence from family expectations. Tonight we're celebrating not just her marriage, but the success that comes from having the courage to define your own path. She's shown all of us that love doesn't require conformity, and support doesn't require agreement. I looked around the room at my family, my team, my friends, and my new husband. All gathered to celebrate a life I'd built on my own terms. Dad was at a table with Mom and Michael, looking genuinely happy for perhaps the first time since I'd known him as an adult. He'd learned to take pride in success that looked different from his own, and I'd learned that his approval, while nice to have, wasn't necessary for my happiness. The evening felt like the conclusion of a story that had begun with shame and rejection, but had ultimately led to freedom and authenticity. I'd lost my family's unconditional approval, but I'd gained something more valuable: unshakable confidence in my own worth and capabilities. As James and I left the reception, I thought about the woman who'd walked out of Dad's retirement party 2 years earlier. She'd been angry, hurt, and uncertain about the future. The woman leaving this celebration was none of those things. She was confident, successful, and surrounded by people who valued her exactly as she was. Sometimes the greatest gift your family can give you is showing you that you don't need their approval to be whole. Sometimes being rejected by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally is actually the push you need to discover who you really are and what you're truly capable of achieving. I'd started that awful night thinking I was losing everything that mattered. I'd ended up gaining everything I actually needed. Have you ever had to choose between family approval and personal authenticity? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your own path. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to disappoint people in order to be true to yourself. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the most painful moments in our lives are actually the beginning of our greatest triumphs. Until next time, keep building the life that makes you proud. regardless of who understands it.